Alright, we're back with My Teacher Flunked the Planet, Chapter 5. If you haven't seen or listened to or whatever, the previous books, make sure to do that, otherwise this is probably really confusing. So, make sure to listen to the first, second, and third, because this is the last, this is the finale. So, don't start with this. Also, if you haven't heard the previous chapters, we're on 5, make sure to listen to 1 through 4. All on my channel, by the way. I have playlists, so. Chapter 5 is called Rumors of War. In the last one, they convinced Susan's parents that they were, going on some sort of school thing. So now everyone's free to go, and they're gonna leave now. "Come on," said Broxholm later that night. "They're about to land." Duncan glanced at the clock on the wall. "I wouldn't be too sure," he said, shifting his poot from one shoulder to the other. "Planes are late a lot these days." I smiled as Broxholm held out his U-rat so Duncan could see the screen, which showed Kreeblum in her Betty Lou Carpoo disguise. When Duncan's poot saw Kreeblum/Carpoo, it lifted its head, at least the portion it was using for its head at the moment, and cried, "Poot! Poot! Poot! Poot!" Kreeblum's own poot was in a Tupperware container in the refrigerator, which was where she kept it when she was away. Kreeblum smiled, then mouthed the words, "Hello, Duncan." Duncan blinked. "She can see me?" Broxholm wrinkled his brow, yes. "We linked U-rats before she left for the airport. She could even speak to you, if not for the fact that she doesn't want to arouse suspicion." "Easier than using a phone, I suppose," muttered Duncan. He was trying not to seem too surprised by things, though how I knew what I wasn't quite sure. "Anyway," continued Broxholm, "Kreeblum says they will be landing soon, therefore we should leave." We followed Broxholm to Kreeblum's cellar. Like his own cellar, this had a secret trapdoor leading to a second cellar, an enormous glowing egg-shaped chamber where Kreeblum kept what most people would call her flying saucer. I don't like that term. It sounds hokey. But if I described the vehicle to people, described the shape, the lights, the way it moved, they would just nod and say, "Oh right, a flying saucer." So I might as well call it that and get it over with. Our seats were in a bubble compartment that let us see our surroundings, though at the moment that meant nothing more than a curved glowing wall. Broxholm touched a yellow half-sphere on the control panel, then spoke a word deep in his throat. The ship began to move forward. Duncan gasped as we lifted into the air. I figured he was afraid we were going to crash into the ceiling. I understood the feeling. I had left it myself the night I went off with Broxholm. But there was no need to worry. Kreeblum's backyard tilted up like a giant trapdoor, and we shot safely into the night sky. Broxholm manipulated 2 of the control spheres. "This will shield us from radar detection," he said. Minutes later, we were flying over Washington, D.C., a trip that would have taken hours in a jet plane. We were so high that Washington and Baltimore were nothing more than smears of light across the land beneath us. "I thought you might like to see that," said Broxholm, gesturing to the lights. He touched the control panel again. We shot forward, then began to fall almost straight down. Sometimes your brain knows things that your body doesn't believe. For example, I was sure Broxholm was in control of the ship, but it was all I could do to keep from screaming when I saw the ground rushing toward us. Long before we would have hit, he began to slow our fall. 5 minutes later, we made a gentle landing in a deserted field. "How far are we from the city?" I asked as we climbed out of the saucer. "About 60 miles, said Broxholm. "There's always an airplane." This one's low. That one was pretty close. About 60 miles, said Broxholm. He stretched out on the grass and began to gaze at the sky, which was clear and filled with stars. I lay down next to him. The stars seemed different to me now that I knew more of what was out there. Knew that intelligent beings on 10,000 worlds were trying to decide what to do about us. After a while, Broxholm made one of his nose sighs. I wondered if he was missing his home. A light breeze whispered through my hair. Bugs were singing and bats zipped through the darkness overhead. A light dew covered the grass. The dew was cool against my hands, which I had crossed behind my head. It was a good night. I thought, if I had ever been able to share a time like this with my father, would I have gone off with Broxholm? I turned to Broxholm and started to say something, but decided not to. After about 45 minutes, I heard a car in the distance. It came closer, stopped for a few minutes, then drove on. Broxholm glanced at his U-Rat. That's them. Soon I saw Susan and Kreeblum walking across the field. Poot! Cried Duncan's Poot, stretching a pair of eye stalks toward Kreeblum. A shooting star streaked through the sky above us. Kreeblum's saucer was fast. Less than 20 minutes after she and Susan joined us, we were in Arizona, where the 5 of us sat on the edge of a cliff, sharing peanut butter sandwiches, crisp apples, and some blobby things that Kreeblum called fimflets. My first bite of fimflets made my tongue think it had died and gone to heaven. When I asked about them, Kreeblum told me they were a kind of fungus people ate on her home planet. Then she told us that what they grew on. Ew! Cried Duncan, spitting a mouthful of fimflet over the edge of the cliff. I don't want to say ignorance is bliss, but clearly Duncan had been a lot happier before he knew the whole truth about fimflets. A moment later, Kreeblum brushed her hands together, then slapped her cheeks 3 times, a gesture that, on her world, meant it was time to get down to business. I think we need to start with an overview, she said, using her nose to pluck a flimflet crumb from her cheek. An overview of what? Asked Susan. This may sound stupid, but I'm still not sure exactly what we're doing. An overview of the problem. We need to show you the reasons Earth has become such an issue throughout the galaxy before we can start to look for some hope that things can change. Kreeblum hesitated, then added, You're going to see some things that aren't pretty, things some adults would say are unsuitable for children to know about. Well, every time. An odd attitude, said Broxholm, since a lot of these unsuitable things are happening to kids. You know, none of this is our fault, said Susan. We're just kids. Why don't you talk to someone in the government? We've considered it, said Broxholm, but most of our projections indicate that formal contact between the Planetary League and one or all of your governments would result in a major war here on Earth. You mean we'd end up fighting with each other? I asked in surprise. Correct, said Kreeblum, swatting a mosquito with her nose. That doesn't make any sense, protested Duncan. Kreeblum made her version of a shrug. How many of your other wars have made sense? Fear is a very powerful motivator among your people. It prompts them to do senseless things. That shut us up until Duncan said, I've got an idea. Why don't you just fry everyone's brains? A silver lid flickered over Broxholm's orange eyes, a sign of worried surprise. He looked at Kreeblum. Kreeblum looked back. When neither of them spoke, I sensed bad news was coming. Duncan, said Kreeblum at last, come with me. I need to talk to you. Looking terrified, Duncan got to his feet and followed Kreeblum into the darkness. That's the end of Chapter 5. See ya.